see everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
The part that we can see.
How would you like to handle this, Mr. Harris? I know we're here to talk about an MOU to kind of related to COVID and the impact that's had on the workforce and trying to address some of the district's needs as well. But how would you like to handle it? Would you like to start off, or?
Well, no, we kind of figured that you would kind of let us know, where you are and what your position is, and then we can process and then get back.
Okay.
All right?
Well, yes, there's some things that we could use help with as we continue to kind of work through the challenges with COVID-19. We have a responsibility to, when students are sent home or directed to go home while we figure out if they have to be quarantined or not, to make sure they have instructional support. We've put some things in place that are working to some extent, but we believe we could do better with some help. The one thing that's going to be really important to us is we'd like to universally use the Google Classroom, much like we used last year, and I think a lot of teachers are already taking advantage of that tool, but we would like to make that a requirement to use the Google Classroom. It really helps facilitate instruction when those students are, sent home for whatever reason. So that was one thing on our list. The other thing we're finding is that we have offered positions, part-time tutorial work, where we need teachers to kind of provide what we call an office hours or like a homework hotline type thing, school by school, and giving up their playing time or working after school to do that. And our current pay rate for that, the $25, does not seem to be attractive enough to lure people for those assignments. So we're interested in increasing that rate and using some of our federal money from ESSER funds to deal with this, to help deal with COVID and boost that rate up. So we want to kind of talk about increasing that pay rate. What else? The issue of having, we've asked some teachers to voluntarily turn on their cameras, and I think that's happening to some extent. We would like to look at that and try to put some more structure around it. And it may not have to be a live camera, but at least recorded lessons. And if we're, ideally, all teachers would be willing to do that out of the goodness of their heart, but if that's not the case.
I'm sorry.
Well, I know we've talked a little bit, if it's something that we'll need to compensate teachers for, then we'd probably have to look at a model where we just kind of make sure that the grades are covered or the core subjects are covered, so it'd be a limited number of teachers. Otherwise, we couldn't afford to do it for everybody, right? So I've got some information that our chief academic officers put together, so we could look at maybe, figuring out what that core group of teachers is on the campus that would need to kind of help with those lessons and recorded lessons, and then figure out what some compensation may look like for that. Those are kind of the big issues for us.
So I can, if you want, I can ask a few questions pertinent to them, and whether you get back to us now or later this week when we have our second session, and then we can go through a couple of our more pressing concerns, if that works for you guys.
That'd be good.
On the quarantine student instruction, so when you say Google Classroom, you mean utilize Google Classroom for the sake of posting assignments or doing virtual assignments or testing potentially, not Google Meets and live video, because they're two distinct things that you asked for. I just want to make sure that if we were able to agree to Google Classroom, that it would be using Google Classroom for the sake of providing work, not providing live instruction. That's a separate camera component.
Absolutely. Yes, I was just speaking to the classroom itself, not the live instruction.
Okay. So that's something we certainly can dive into. Like, as you said, I think a good percentage of teachers are probably already utilizing it because it's the simplest way to deal with so many kids being quarantined. On the tutoring pay rate, what were you thinking as far as an increase to try to be more attractive?
Well, it's currently 25. I was going to suggest we boost it to 35.
Okay. And then as far as cameras and recorded lessons, what, you said, I guess you guys might have some data on either a number of teachers you had in mind or specific courses or grade levels? How can we better understand the scope, because it's being described as limited, so
Right.
what are the limits?
I can help with that. So at an elementary school, we'd be looking at basically one teacher per grade, so it'd be about six teachers. And then at a middle school, we were looking at 5 core classes by grade level, so 5 times 3 would be 15, about 15 teachers at the middle school. And then at a high school, we estimated that it'd take 20 teachers to cover the 5 core courses by grade level
Per school?
per school.
Okay. You said high school core, so graduation requirement classes?
Yes.
Okay. And then as far as compensation for those teachers who, and I guess it's a side question to that or a lead question to that, these teachers presumably would be solicited to volunteer. They would not be picked by administration and say, you have to do this, you're the 3rd grade, or you're the American history teacher at our school. How would that selection or volunteer process potentially play out? Do you guys have an idea?
I'd like to, I'd probably circle with the team on that one and get back to you.
Okay.
But we were looking at like some type of stipend for the semester, or with the elementary schools, we have trimesters, so we'd have to figure out how to break that down.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, the details of that would certainly be helpful, and with, from our perspective, we certainly favor that schools would send an email soliciting people who wanted to participate in that, versus a school dictating who would be the camera teacher, if there was any opposition to it by an individual.
I think, ideally, yeah, it would be we'd want people that were interested in doing it. I'm just not certain, like at the high school level, that it's going to get to where, we only have X number of algebra teachers or history, some core subject that they have to have, and maybe if there's not volunteers, we might need a mechanism to draft somebody.
And would the premise be that, since you're talking about one per grade level or one per subject area, the premise would be that no matter at Boynton Beach High School, there's an American history teacher who would be recording virtual or, streamed lessons. Anybody who was absent on any given day due to quarantine for COVID exposure would tune into that one teacher's class, presumably, even if they were in 6 or 7 different teachers' American history classes?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be a limitation of it.
So I guess a question, and whether you have the answer now, would be what would be the scope of that teacher's responsibility as far as those students and assignments, and would they presumably, even though they're quarantined, they're watching my American history class because I'm the camera teacher, I've agreed to that, but they still need to check in with their true American history teacher because assignments associated with the class that they're in and grades associated with the class they're truly in, their home class, I guess, that would remain with the primary.
Yes, or the folks that might be working the homework hotline or something like that. But it would be more, the expectation is about recording the lesson, posting the lesson so it's there, and less about trying, we don't want them trying to do
Simultaneous.
dual teaching.
Okay, so recorded lessons and cameras in the plan that you've got is more like closed circuit TV. They get to watch the class. It's not a Google Meet where I would interact with these students on quarantine necessarily?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's definitely helpful. Does anyone else have any questions on those 3?
Well, the last time, and the scope of the recording this time is a little different, so it may or may not play a part. But one of the things we asked for was that the recording, the video of any action that may take place in the classroom would only be used as a secondary measure as opposed to a primary measure for a challenge for any discipline purposes. So, for example, if something happened in the classroom on camera, it could only be used, the video of that of that action could only be used if it was because of something else. And it was being used as support of an activity, not the primary activity in and of itself. That's what we had in our last MOU. So you can look at our last MOU and see exactly, what we did with that, so that, we didn't, create any challenges by putting people on camera.
That sounds good. I'd like to see that language from last time. I think that
Okay.
probably work for us.
All right.
So how long would this be in place for? Is this like going to be for a full semester or a trimester, depending on if it's elementary or secondary?
Yeah, I'm looking at for this current school year,
Okay.
and then maybe the compensation would be tied to the semester or trimester.
Okay, so we had a concern with last year's MOU. It was a full year MOU. There was language in there towards the end that said that the two parties would meet on a bi-weekly basis or some frequency to discuss, potential changes relative to realizing conditions maybe aren't exactly what the MOU envisioned. That really didn't go anywhere last year. We raised an issue at one of the first meetings, and there was a disagreement, and basically it became clear that those meetings, nothing could be forced, obviously. So once we signed the MOU, that was it, unless the district wanted to change something, and they came to us presumably. So as far as duration goes, we definitely would favor it being at the semester mark, or I guess maybe for elementary school, say it's for the first 2 trimesters, something to the effect that if conditions improve or change, that there is some automatic trigger that says if we want to continue this, it needs to be renegotiated or it sunsets. Just because of that experience last year, that if we raised a concern and we're told that we have an MOU, we don't need to change anything, that makes us a little tepid about a full year, especially now that, unlike last year where it was assumed that the entire year was going to be under COVID because the vaccine was or wasn't coming out in the springtime, now we, I guess, hope that by second semester, if numbers fall back down to where they were at the end of last year, that things will improve. So we just have a concern about a year-long agreement without any automatic forced renegotiation to address concerns that might come up.
Yeah, that probably works for us. The conditions are changing. We're trying to do more things, in terms of testing of students and employees that might help. This right now, I feel like we're sending home too many students that are healthy and for good. The good news is most of them are staying healthy. Mm-hmm. We're trying to get more information on how many positives come from those students that have been sent home, but I suspect it's relatively low. So some of these measures that we're talking about, with the recorded lessons and stuff, we'd like to reduce our dependence on them as soon as possible. So a shorter term probably works for both of us.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions? I got a list of ours, but I don't want to move on unless you got more.
So just clarification for me. When you said use the Google Classroom for kids at home, so it's not that they're sitting, are these students, you were sent home, you're quarantined, are you then signing in and watching Randall's class? Or are you going to be looking at Randall's or any teachers? This would apply across the board. I'm just trying to make sure I understand, because you're talking about grouping a section and now we're doing broad. So all teachers would put up assignments on the Google Classroom and the kids can access them at any point. And then you're talking about a separate section where teachers are going to record a lesson, and that'll be accessible by those same students that were sent home.
Correct. The students that are sent home, and we have it's the Q code or whatever, but they're directed to stay home. Then those would be the students that they're considered present in school, and that we have to provide them the instructional support. So those students would then, maybe they're in Mr. Tierney's class normally, but Mr. Tierney's not the teacher that's recording the lessons. Maybe it's Mr. LaCava is the teacher who's in second grade posting his lesson, so that that student would then could view Mr. LaCava's lesson, but they'd still have the connection to their own teacher's Google Classroom and still be trying to keep up with their coursework.
Right, so there's no live interaction with the student at home, with the teacher who's recording?
It doesn't have to be. It could be recorded as long as it's put up timely, and we probably need to spell that out a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, so this is going to be used strictly for the kids that are sent home in quarantine. We're not talking about parents who take kids out to take them to Disney for a week.
Correct.
Just
No,
wanna
I
be-
think we're not permitted to kind of go down that road of distance learning, what we had last year, at least at this point. And so this is just trying to address the need of students that we've directed to stay home.
Okay.
Okay.
How will we address kids that are like in gifted classes and such? Because at the elementary level, you may have students that are in second grade gifted, or you follow what I'm saying? How, maybe I'm getting into the weeds, but this is going to be a question that's going to come to me, so.
Yes, I don't think you'll be able to differentiate, because then you would need, instead of 20 high school classes, you might need 60 because of, regular honors, AP, ACE, et cetera, so.
Yeah. I mean, I would still, we're not going to be able to make this perfect. If, we have already appealed to teachers if they're willing to turn their camera on. I don't know to what extent that's occurring. I'm trying to work with our IT folks to see if they can get a read on that. But if a teacher was willing, like if the gifted teacher was willing to do that or record their lesson, then that's great. But in terms of requiring it, and if we have to compensate people to require it, we just can't afford to do everybody.
Right. And the 5 core courses, what are those? English, math, science? Do you have that list? Or for middle school or high school? Yeah.
Yeah, middle was 5, and then high school, I think, was 20.
No,
Yeah,
They were both 5 cores.
5 for each.
5 for
5
each.
per grade level.
I'll confirm that. I don't want to give you the wrong answer, but I just think I know
Okay.
it, but let me make sure.
Okay,
It's the core subject areas.
I don't know. I'd like to know. Cool, thank you.
Okay, so we have a couple of concerns that we would like to weave in there and address in some fashion based on feedback from our teachers and school-based employees, most of which have to do with time and the imposition of kind of COVID-related activities and how it's affected planning time and relief time and lunch and in the morning, kind of the couple of minutes before kids are let in. So we have concerns, and it varies, from school level to school level, about breakfast supervision duties, which are being required at a lot of middle and elementary schools, which basically is teachers are being told to let students in earlier than they had before COVID. And then last year in the MOU, we had a provision that said if they did let kids in early, there was comp time for compensation. So we're certainly looking for, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or another addition to that list is the parent pickup line, most specifically in elementary school. There's teachers that are saying that, because of the delays and social distancing, that the parent pickup line, which used to finish at 2:15, 2:20, is now stretching to 2:30, 2:45, and basically eating most of their planning. So we're looking for, one or the other, some sort of protection or prohibition against infringing on those times, so that they can continue to do their planning during school or have their lunch or be able to set up in the morning during what is now considered like a breakfast time period, or some sort of compensation for that. So that's something we just wanted to put out there, that with the additional potential duties of Google Classroom, some teachers might have to do the recording if we come to an agreement on that, breakfast supervision, lunch supervision, bus/parent pickup. We just feel that sub-coverage, teachers are being pulled to cover for vacant classrooms on a regular basis. We just worry that if they lose all their planning time or all their breaks, that's going to create a problem that we already has as far as we're concerned. So that's something we definitely want to look into. We worry that right now, because there's no restrictions necessarily or costs associated with those additional duties that take away planning time, that the principals who are using it without a lot of thought involved, they're just basically telling everyone you have to do this every day. A cost limits usage or forces people to consider how to do it more efficiently. So that's something that we've certainly been talking about. A tangent to those, also in the last MOU, so we have an agreement that dates back a couple of years on PLCs and the fact that they're optional and teachers can't be forced to go to them. Last year, just to remind people, both teachers and administrators, that PLCs were optional. There was a sentence in the MOU that said that and reaffirmed that. We're looking for something like that again this year. Again, we have the joint memo going back to Dr. Avosa's time, but there's been an uptick in reports of PLC schedules, and I think it might be associated with some of those new positions, the PLC coordinators coming in, where you've got these people whose jobs now are to kind of run PLCs, and therefore I think administrators have been a little eager to create more rigid PLC requirements as far as attendance, not just for teachers who would be attending the PLCs, but also in elementary school in particular. If I'm in a class instructing my students and the administration sets up a PLC schedule and they pull me from my instruction, there are fine arts teachers and other teachers basically being told, if this teacher goes to a PLC, you now have to cover their class for a half hour, 45 minutes. So I would clump the PLC item in there with time being stretched thin under the current circumstances, making it even more difficult for these teachers. So we'd certainly appreciate some sort of simple language like last MOU reaffirming that those are, we can talk about PLCs in a broader sense once we're through COVID, because obviously it's something important to the district and we do see value in them, but we want to get to fixing PLCs after the pandemic, not have it be another burden placed on the plate of teachers at this time.
Okay.
So you talked about the stipend associated with potential camera and recording use. That's something that you said you'll have some more details for us at the next meeting. We would appreciate, this has been a big request, and it certainly won't be able to be done for all schools because some have already held their open houses, but there is a serious desire for teachers, school-based instructional staff to have their open houses, if they have not occurred yet, be virtual. There's just, and it's anecdotal, so I take it for what it is, but I've had teachers talk about that they've had their open house, and within days there anecdotally was an uptick in teachers quarantined because you had a bunch of kind of random people on campus all at once, a large number. So I know that's something that a lot of teachers who haven't had their open house yet would greatly appreciate. I know that we discussed offline a little bit, and Broward, I think, has implemented it, although I don't have the fine details, the idea of using the federal funds to incentivize vaccinations. I think Broward settled at $250. I'm not positive on the precise requirements beyond just getting the vaccine and demonstrating proof of it, but it is something that's out there. It's explicitly outlined in the appropriate uses for ESSER funds, whether it's for a county or municipal government to incentivize residents with financial means or for an employer. So we definitely would be looking for anything to get the vaccination rate up, because that's our number one protection against the need for protracted quarantines, especially of employees at this time. And thank you for indulging me, because I know I've got a list here. We have in our contract the quarantine provision that says if you're quarantined by a legally constituted medical or legal authority, that your sick days are covered if you can demonstrate that. We just wanted to make sure in this MOU that we cleared up any confusion that we know if you go to the Department of Health or your physician and they have a letter that indicates you tested positive or you might have been exposed, and they're willing to affirm that, that would get you covered. There's a gray area in there based on our experience last year that if a principal sends you home because of contact tracing, so I teach second grade class, one or more of my kids was infected, the kids and myself now are quarantined due to exposure until we go through the protocols. It's always been our understanding that if a principal acting on behalf of the school board to implement a policy that they voted on, that to us constitutes a governing authority, a legal authority. We just want to make sure that it's articulated somewhere that if you go to work and your boss sends you home from work because of an exposure clearly identified through your duties at work, that there's no question that if I'm sent home for that purpose, that quarantine provision covers that. Again, anecdotally, I've seen a lot of stories, and I mentioned this at the school board meeting, that there's conflicting information about how to report if you're invoking that section of the contract, and is it just the doctor and the Department of Health, or what happens when your principal does it, because they're not a medical authority or a legal authority, although they are acting on behalf of the school board, which is. So we wouldn't mind a sentence kind of just clarifying that. I guess the next biggest one is sub-coverage compensation for employees who are taken from planning or split classes because a teacher's out and a sub does not fill it. As you guys know, obviously, there are sub shortages right now throughout the district, and again, this goes back to time as a concern for our employees, that there are teachers who have reported that they're losing 2 or 3 planning periods, 40, 60% of their planning every week, because they're constantly being asked to cover. The contract language we have surrounding sub-coverage by an employee and the compensation it was never envisioned to be a regular thing. You know, in the past, it had always been if a sub signed up and didn't show up, you needed some help. If a teacher got sick during the day and left, you needed some help the second half of the day. Now, because of the frequency and the cost in terms of lost planning time, which inherently causes you to have to do work off the clock, we know other counties have increased the compensation of teachers or school-based staff that are required to give up planning or take on students. So I know Broward, I'm waiting on the exact language from their union to give it to me, but their compensation is significantly higher for teachers who have to give up planning or take on students, and we're looking to, in a perfect world for us, we would try to cap the amount of time that someone could be required to do coverage. That's number one. If that's not feasible because of the current circumstances, we understand if there's a shortage and nobody's there, someone has to supervise the kids. So if they have to do it, the compensation certainly at least soothes that burn of losing your planning time. So that's one of the highest priorities, just based on teachers' responses to me, that they're feeling burnout again because of the time pinch from all angles that's causing them to do more off the clock work than they normally do.
Okay.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
One of the concerns that's been brought to my attention is especially on teachers that are considered resource teachers, that are either push in or pull out, that they are missing time with those students whose IEPs require a certain number of minutes per week, it's not per day. And so their concern is that the students who are already behind and have plans are again losing out. I mean, we're caught between the rock and the hard place, because you can't leave students unsupervised, but then the students who are supposed to be getting these services can't get the services because the person has to cover because there's nobody there. So we're doing this dichotomy. And then for some reason, somebody was saying that on this new form about absence, I guess there's some pilot program in the district, about the app, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. They're being asked to put in, when they're doing that, how are they going to make up that time that they missed because they were pulled to cover somebody else's class, which would be impossible to do. So this is a concern that they want to provide the services, and they understand what the district's at, and when your principal comes here and says, hey, I need you to cover this class, their concern is that they're not doing what they're legally required to do, even though it's minutes per week. If you have it numerous days in a row, there's just no time to do it. So that's a real concern for the teachers, because they don't want the students to fall behind. They want to spend the time in front of their kids, instructing them so that we can get everybody back on track. Okay, so I don't know what the answer is, but I wanted you aware of those two concerns, please.
So thank you for that, Denise. Because that is a deeper issue of the sub-coverage, is specifically ESE, ESOL, and then fine arts teachers. As Denise pointed out, for ESE and ESOL, some of them feel like it because it is happening, that when they're pulled to covered so frequently, they are literally not providing the legal services that they're employed to provide. And then for fine arts teachers, the concern at the elementary school is that when they're pulled frequently to cover all day for subs that don't show up or subs that don't take assignments, that now they're literally not providing fine arts, at least not during they can only do it so with the kids they're supervising, not everyone who they're supposed to service in a given day. So some sort of limit or protection to make sure that those teachers that aren't just being pulled from planning to cover, they're being pulled from their literal service or instruction. There has to be some restriction so they can perform their job, their primary function, especially with regards to legally fulfilling their obligations, whether it's for standards in fine arts or for the ESE and ESOL in terms of the services they're providing. Thank you very much, Denise, for bringing that part up.
No, we agree. We want them doing their first job. So if you have situations like that, please bring them to my attention, and we'll try to work through them.
Thank you. I think you guys covered the testing sites, and we're eager to learn more about that. The idea that teachers now who are exposed, will immediately be able to go to, I guess, one of two locations that you guys have set up with the Department of Health. And then I guess I read too that you've got, like a mobile van that potentially could go to schools where there was some sort of, not an outbreak, but, infections occurred and anyone who wanted to get tested. So we definitely appreciate that, to try to get them back as soon as possible. Other things, and I guess they deal more with compensation. We mentioned that the governor issued $1,000 bonuses for the overwhelming majority of instructional personnel, but based on data you guys provided us, about 1,300 teachers, give or take, in the bargaining unit were excluded by virtue of their job title and state qualification criteria for that bonus. We certainly know, based on their responses, that they would appreciate the district doing something to make them whole. So I know that's relative to the COVID relief funds that the governor issued to about 11,000 plus employees, and then those 13,000 within the unit were excluded. So we're certainly hoping that that's something that the district can do. I know other districts have done it in some capacity throughout the state as well. Thank you again. That was a lot from me. I don't know if I missed anything specifically, but that's kind of our, again, it really, I think most of it boils down to protecting time to do the job that they are employed to do with fidelity, while still trying to help, obviously, under the circumstances, and then compensation associated with increased responsibilities that are not in the contract but might be in this MOU.
Okay, well, I took notes. I think we've got some things that we can work on here and come back with our a more formal proposal. I guess we need to put pen to paper and write it out. I know we've got a session on Friday, but before anything, Mr. Tierney, anything from the team that we need to bring up? All right, then, I guess let us work on that and come back to you Friday, and we'll see if we can reach agreement on some of these items.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely appreciate everyone's time who's here and who tuned in, and we're looking forward to doing everything we can to make a better situation out of this for the students and the employees. So we appreciate the cooperation.
Same here. Thank you.
Come up with that money, Mark.